Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to look at two dance and music traditions that at first glance, they don't seem to have much to do with salsa. In fact, if I showed them to you without any explanation, you might even wonder why we're talking about them in a salsa musicality course. One comes from European court dancing, the other comes from Afro-Haitian traditions in eastern Cuba. One looks formal and elegant, the other looks rhythmic and communal. But here's what's fascinating. Both of these traditions were developing in Cuba around the same time, and both would eventually leave fingerprints on what we now know as salsa. So today we're going to explore and compare these two worlds side by side and see what they can teach us about the evolution of salsa that we have today. Now, before we talk about the dances themselves and the music, we need to understand the environment. During the late 1700s, early 1800s, Cuba was becoming one of the most important cultural crossroads in the Caribbean. European traditions were arriving through Spain, France, and Britain. African traditions were being preserved and transformed by enslaved communities throughout the island. And another major event happened, the Haitian Revolution. When Haiti gained independence, many French settlers and enslaved Africans left Haiti and settled in eastern Cuba. This movement of people brought enormous cultural influence to the island, and one of the traditions that emerged from this migration was something called the Tumba Francesa. So now we have two worlds existing at the same time. European social dancing developed into the Contradanza. Afro-Haitian traditions developed into the Tumba Francesa. And what makes it so fascinating is that they were not isolated from one another, they were influencing each other. Let's start with the Contradanza. The Contradanza came from European court and social dance traditions. Its ancestry can be traced through English country dance, the French contradance, the Spanish adaptations that eventually arrived in Cuba. When we watch Contradanza today, we immediately notice structure. We see couples, formations, organized movements, formal postures, coordinated figures. As you're watching, pay attention to the figures. Notice how dancers move together. Notice how couples maintain organized relationships to one another. You may even recognize concepts that still exist in salsa. Some of the figures used in contradanza included the paseo, the cadena, the sostenido, and the sedazo. Now, obviously, these don't look exactly like modern crossbody leads that happen in salsa today, but think about the concepts: traveling, changing places, passing one another, partner coordination, structured movement through space. These ideas already existed long before salsa. Even our modern partner frame has roots that can be traced back through these earlier European social dance traditions. So while the movement vocabulary has evolved dramatically, the concept of organized partner dancing was already developing at this time. But here's where things get really interesting. Most people think contradanza was purely European. It wasn't. Something revolutionary was happening. African rhythmic ideas were beginning to enter European dance music, and this changes everything. One of the most important things happening in Cuba during this period, the incorporation of African rhythmic cells into European music. This may sound like a small detail, but it wasn't. This was the musical revolution for that time. For centuries, European dance music had been built around very different rhythmic concepts. But in Cuba, musicians began incorporating rhythmic ideas coming from African traditions. One of those rhythmic ideas is what we'll eventually hear evolve into patterns that become central to the danzón and later salsa. One of the clearest examples can be heard through a rhythm known as the kata pattern. Today, I want you to start training your ears to hear it because we're going to encounter it again and again throughout this course. And it's going to transform as it evolves throughout salsa musicality's history. Now, listen to this tumba francesa example. Don't worry about the melody, don't worry about the singing. Specifically, listen for the wooden percussion instrument called the kata. Your challenge is, can you isolate that repeating rhythm? Can you hear the pattern underneath everything else? Listen several times if necessary because this rhythm is moving fast. Later in the course, we're going to slow it down, and when we do, you'll discover something fascinating. The same rhythmic idea becomes one of the building blocks of danzón and later appears inside of salsa music later on. So even though it sounds distant right now, you're actually hearing part of salsa's ancestry. Now, let's look at the tumba francesa itself. The tumba francesa developed primarily in eastern Cuba after the arrival from French and Afro-Haitian communities from Haiti. What makes tumba francesa so unique is that it represents both African and European influences at the same time. When we watch it, we notice immediately drumming, call and response singing, community participation, polyrhythm, improvisation. But we also notice something surprising. There are partner figures, there are formations, there are organized movement structures, there are even movements that resemble European social dance. One of the most important styles inside of the tumba francesa is called the maçon. Notice how dancers interact. Notice the elegance. Notice the partner relationships. Notice the formations. Some of this reminds you of the Contradanza, right? And that's not an accident. The same cultural exchange happening in European music was also happening in Afro-Haitian traditions. African communities were preserving their musical identity, but they were also incorporating European dance aesthetics. So the influence was moving both directions. European traditions were becoming more African. African traditions were incorporating European influences. Both streams were evolving together. So at this point, you might be asking, what does any of this have to do with salsa? Well, the answer is much more than you might think. Contradanza contributes partner structure, social dance etiquette, organized figures, formalized coupling. Tumba francesa contributes rhythmic complexity, call and response, community participation, African movement aesthetics. The magic of Cuban music happens because these worlds eventually collide. As we continue through this course, we'll watch these streams slowly merge. Contradanza evolves into danza, danza evolves into danzón. African traditions continue influencing changui, rumba, son, and other forms. And eventually, all of these streams begin feeding into the music that would eventually become salsa. So, what we're looking at today is not ancient history. We're looking at the early ingredients of salsa before salsa existed. So, now, after watching today's lesson and examples, answer these questions in the comments. Tomorrow, we're going to follow one of these streams into danzón and discover how European court dance became one of the most important milestones in the development of Cuban music. Thanks for tuning in today for day 2, and I'll see you in day 3.